I thought I was just fixing her broken window, but that night, she made it clear, she didn't want me to leave. The story begins with something ordinary, a broken window. Yet from the moment I stepped into her house, it didn't feel ordinary at all. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour when the sun turns gentle, spilling a warm golden light through the trees outside. Her living room carried that glow, but the broken pane of glass let in a sharp autumn chill, stirring the curtains with every draft. I noticed she had pinned the fabric back with a heavy vase, but the wind still slipped through, carrying faint scents of damp leaves and cooling earth. She stood a few feet away, a woman of quiet poise, though I could see the frustration in the way she pressed her lips together. She was around 40, graceful, self-assured, but with a kind of vulnerability tucked just beneath the surface. Her blouse was simple, off-white cotton, and her sleeves were rolled back to her elbows as if she had tried, and failed, to handle the repair herself. A strand of hair had fallen loose across her face, and without realizing it, she kept brushing it back, a gesture that made her seem softer than the confidence she usually carried. When she greeted me, her voice was warm but edged with embarrassment. "I'm sorry to trouble you with this. I should have called someone else, but I remembered you said you were handy with things like this." Her words were casual, but there was more in them, an unspoken trust, maybe even a hope. I tried to play it cool, though inside, my chest tightened at being singled out. As I set my toolbox down, I caught the subtle details, the faint aroma of jasmine lingering in the air, maybe her perfume, the way the late sunlight caught on the faint silver in her hair, the quiet in the room, broken only by the curtain's restless flutter. Everything about her presence made the space feel heavier, more intimate. I ran my hand along the wooden frame, checking the damage, and she stepped closer to point out where the pane had cracked. Our shoulders almost touched, though neither of us commented on it. She was close enough that I could sense the warmth of her body against the cool draft seeping through the glass. "I didn't mean for you to rush," she said softly, her voice lowering as if the stillness of the room demanded it. I hate the sound of the wind at night. It makes the house feel emptier than it is." That confession lingered between us, heavier than I expected. I glanced at her, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Her eyes were steady, carrying both strength and loneliness. In that moment, the broken window felt like more than glass. It was a glimpse into her life, something fragile, something she couldn't quite fix alone. And without saying it, I knew that by being here, I was stepping into more than just a repair job. The moment I rolled up my sleeves and leaned toward the frame, I realized this wasn't going to be a quick repair. The wood had swollen slightly from years of damp air, the old screws stripped down from overuse. It wasn't difficult work, but it demanded care, and for some reason, the idea of slowing down didn't bother me at all. She insisted on helping. At first, I thought she meant just to watch, but soon she was right there beside me, holding the frame steady with both hands as I loosened the old screws. The curtain brushed against her arm, fluttering like it wanted to lean into her warmth. I knelt down to align the bottom hinge, and when I looked up, her face was closer than I expected, her hair spilling down past her cheek as she concentrated. Our hands met first by accident, reaching for the same screwdriver. Her fingers were cool at first touch, but then they warmed against mine before she pulled back quickly, laughing under her breath. "Sorry. I keep forgetting who's supposed to be in charge here." I smiled, though my throat felt tight. "We can share the title. Assistant repairwoman?" Her eyes softened at that, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'll take it." The work wasn't fast. At one point she crouched beside me to brace the frame, her shoulder pressed against mine as we both leaned into the wood. I could feel the steady strength in her posture, but also the small tremor in her breath when the frame slipped slightly and I steadied it with both hands. My arm brushed against hers, the faintest graze of skin, and it was enough to send a quiet rush through me. She didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head closer, her hair brushing lightly across my sleeve as she looked at what I was doing. From the corner of my eye, I saw the lines of concentration on her face, not harsh, but graceful, softened by the golden light falling through the opposite window. She looked at the repair as if it were more than a window, as if she needed it to hold. Every so often, she gave small directions, her voice calm and measured. But beneath that, I sensed something else, the awareness of how near we were, the way our movements kept overlapping. I tried to focus on the hinge, on the screws, on anything but the subtle magnetism pulling me toward her. When the final screw tightened, we both exhaled at the same time, laughter bubbling up unexpectedly. The window was steady again, no longer rattling against the frame. But instead of moving apart, we stayed there for a moment longer, shoulders still touching, the air between us heavier than before. Her hand lingered against the wood, close to mine, and she said quietly, "You make it look so easy." The words were simple, but her tone wasn't. It carried gratitude, yes, but also a softness that made me want to stay right there, pressed into that fragile space between ordinary help and something neither of us had spoken aloud. When the last screw slid into place and the frame held firm, I leaned back on my heels, wiping the dust from my hands. The window stood solid now, glass steady against the frame, the curtain no longer fluttering with every stray gust. It should have felt like closure, a job done. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something neither of us had expected. She stood beside me, quiet, her hand still resting against the edge of the pane as though testing its strength. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of wind outside, muffled now by the repaired glass. Inside, silence spread, not awkward, but weighted, like a blanket settling over us both. She exhaled softly, and I caught the subtle shift in her shoulders, the kind of release that comes from letting go of something heavy. "It's strange," she murmured, almost to herself. "A window shouldn't mean this much. But I hated how it rattled at night, it made the house feel so empty." Her words lingered in the air. I turned my head toward her, and she didn't look away this time. Her eyes found mine, steady, searching, as if she were waiting to see whether I understood the meaning behind her confession. I did. I felt it in the silence more than in her voice. The sunlight caught her features in a way that made the moment blur. The faint creases at the corner of her eyes softened when she blinked, her lips parting just slightly as though she might say something else. I should have spoken then, a simple reassurance, a light remark to ease the tension. But the truth was, words felt intrusive, too clumsy for what was passing between us. So I stayed quiet. She shifted closer, not enough to close the space between us, but enough that her sleeve brushed against mine. The touch was so light I might have imagined it, but the warmth it left behind told me I hadn't. My pulse quickened, my mind filling with 1,000 things I could never quite say out loud. How beautiful she looked in the fading light, how much I wanted to hold on to the softness of this silence. Her gaze dipped, just for a second, to where our arms nearly touched, then lifted again to meet mine. Her eyes carried a vulnerability that startled me, the kind you don't often see in someone so composed. It made me wonder if she was fighting the same storm I was, the urge to lean closer, to let the silence end in something more than words. But neither of us moved. Instead, we stood there, two people bound by nothing more than a repaired window and a silence that said everything we couldn't. And in that stillness, I realized, the air between us had changed. It wasn't just gratitude she felt. It wasn't just kindness holding me there. Something unspoken had taken root, fragile but undeniable. The silence had settled so deeply that I almost forgot the sound of her voice. When she finally spoke, it felt like a ripple breaking across still water. "You're not leaving yet, are you?" It was phrased like a question, but her tone wasn't asking, it was coaxing. Her hand, light and sure, rested against my arm as if to anchor me there. The touch wasn't firm, not insistent, but it carried more weight than any grip could. It was an unspoken request, "Stay." I turned to her, half smiling, trying to mask the way my chest tightened. I thought I'd done my part. Windows standing strong. My work here might be finished. She shook her head softly, a strand of hair slipping loose again. This time she didn't brush it back. "After all that effort, you at least deserve some tea." The words were simple, yet there was something layered in them, as if tea wasn't really the point at all. Her fingers lingered on my sleeve before she drew her hand away, moving toward the kitchen. "Come on," she added, her voice warmer now, less guarded. I followed, though the truth was I didn't need convincing. The shift from living room to kitchen was subtle, but it felt like crossing into another kind of intimacy. The air carried the faint aroma of dried herbs and something citrusy, maybe lemon polish on the counters. The overhead light glowed soft and golden, gentler than the sharpness of the autumn sun outside. Everything about the space felt lived in, warm, a place where someone's presence lingered long after they'd stepped out of the room. She moved gracefully, though there was a slight nervousness in the way she opened the cupboard and reached for the cups. I noticed her pause a beat too long before choosing the mugs, as though she was buying time. "Sugar?" she asked, glancing at me briefly, her eyes holding mine just a little too long before dropping away again. "Plain is fine," I said, though I barely cared about the tea. What mattered was the way her voice softened around me, how the edges of her composure bent just enough to reveal something more tender beneath. I found myself leaning on the counter, watching her. The way she brushed her hair back with the back of her wrist. The way the steam curled up as she poured the hot water, blurring the air between us for a moment like a veil. "You know," she said, stirring slowly, "I don't usually ask people for help. I don't like the feeling of needing someone." Her voice faltered slightly, as if admitting it cost her something. "But tonight, I didn't want to be alone with that window." Her confession hung between us, more revealing than she likely intended. She set the cups down, sliding one toward me, her hand brushing mine in the process. She didn't pull back quickly this time. Instead, her fingers lingered for a second, warm against my skin. Then, with the faintest smile, she repeated it, almost like a promise, "Now you're not leaving either." The kitchen felt different from the living room, less formal, more alive with the kind of warmth you only notice when you let yourself slow down. The light above the counter glowed softly, casting a gentle circle around us while the rest of the house faded into shadow. Outside, the repaired window reflected back the faint outline of our figures, as though the night itself was watching. She set the mugs on the table, sliding mine toward me before sitting across. The steam curled upward, carrying the earthy fragrance of tea that mingled with the faint citrus polish and something softer, undeniably her. For a few moments, we sipped quietly. The warmth seeped into my hands through the ceramic, grounding me even as I felt the pull of her presence across the table. She sat with one elbow propped lightly on the wood, chin resting in her hand, her gaze steady but unhurried. There was no rush to fill the silence, she seemed to savor it, as though she knew the quiet itself said more than small talk ever could. Finally, she spoke, her tone low, almost reflective. "It's funny. People always assume I'm strong, capable. And most of the time, I am. But when the nights are long, and the wind pushes through cracks in the house, I can't help but hear it. The emptiness." Her eyes flicked to the repaired window as she said it, then back to me. I caught the faint shimmer of vulnerability in her gaze, a glimpse she didn't often show. I set my cup down, leaning forward slightly. "You don't have to hide that. Not with me." The words left me before I had time to second-guess them. Her lips curved in a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes just yet. "You say that like it's simple. Most people don't want to see the cracks." She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "But you noticed them. Even before the window." The weight of her words settled between us. I wanted to respond, to assure her I didn't see weakness in her honesty, only strength. But instead, I just held her gaze, letting the silence carry what words might ruin. She exhaled softly, then shifted the conversation. "What about you? You're young, but you don't seem like you're chasing the things most 20-somethings do." Her perception caught me off guard. I smiled faintly. Maybe I've never felt at home in my own crowd. Nights out, endless noise, it all feels shallow sometimes. I guess I'm drawn to places that feel real. People who feel real. Her eyes lingered on mine, and something softened in her expression, a recognition, a quiet agreement. The kettle ticked faintly as it cooled, filling the pause with its tiny settling sounds. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her fingers brushing along the side of her cup before she lifted it again. The movement was simple, but the way her eyes never quite left me made it feel deliberate, almost like a test. And for the first time, I realized we weren't just sharing tea. We were sharing the kind of honesty people spend years protecting. The kind that only surfaces when the walls fall, and the glow of a quiet kitchen makes it safe to be seen. The tea had cooled, but neither of us seemed eager to finish it. We sat with our cups half full, caught in the kind of stillness that doesn't feel empty but alive, charged with something unnamed. She rose from her chair first, gathering her mug as though to break the spell, yet when she reached for mine, her fingers brushed against my hand. The contact was feather-light, but it held. My hand lingered on the ceramic just a moment longer than necessary, and when I looked up, her eyes were already on me. Her breath caught, subtle but unmistakable. For a heartbeat, the world seemed suspended. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the cooling kettle, all of it fell into the background. All that existed was her touch, the warmth of her skin against mine, and the unspoken question in her gaze. She didn't move her hand away. Not right away. Instead, her thumb grazed the edge of my knuckle, almost absent-mindedly, as if testing the line between accident and intention. My pulse hammered in my throat, yet I forced myself to stay still, afraid that even the smallest shift would shatter the fragile moment. When she finally did release the cup, she didn't step back. She stayed close, her hand resting on the counter beside mine, the distance between us reduced to a breath. Her eyes softened, then sharpened again, as though she were wrestling with words too heavy to speak. I don't know why she stopped, the sentence trailing into the air. Her voice was low, uncertain in a way I hadn't heard before. For all her confidence, this moment stripped her bare. I swallowed hard, resisting the urge to fill the silence with something careless. Instead, I waited. And in that waiting, her vulnerability became clear, not weakness, but a quiet surrender to the truth that lingered between us. She tilted her head slightly, her hair slipping forward. I had the sudden, dizzying thought of brushing it back, of letting my fingers tuck it behind her ear. The thought alone sent a rush through me. But I didn't move. I stayed rooted, because the tension in the air wasn't meant to be broken, it was meant to be savored. Finally, she smiled, small and trembling at the edges. You see, now you're not leaving either. The words weren't playful this time. They carried weight, softened by the vulnerability she rarely let show. I felt my lips curve into a faint smile of my own, though my chest ached with everything I couldn't say back. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, full of everything we had both left unspoken, the longing, the restraint, the fragile tenderness of two people meeting in the space between confession and denial. And though nothing more was said, I knew that moment would linger longer than any words could. The air between us lingered thick with things unspoken, but neither of us reached for words anymore. Instead, she drew in a quiet breath, her hand falling gently from the counter. For a moment, I thought the spell might break, that she'd retreat into composure, slip back behind the confidence that shielded her so often. But she didn't. Come, she said softly, almost like an afterthought. Her voice carried no command, just a gentle pull. She turned toward the living room, and I followed without question. The space felt different now than it had when I first arrived. The repaired window no longer rattled, the draft had stilled. Instead of emptiness, the room carried a hush that felt protective, as though the house itself was grateful for the silence. She sank onto the couch, tucking her legs lightly beneath her, leaving a space beside her that seemed both casual and intentional. I sat down, close but not quite touching, though the warmth of her presence filled the narrow gap between us. For a while, we didn't speak. The night had deepened outside, the faint shimmer of moonlight outlining the glass I had fixed. Inside, the lamplight spread softly across the room, brushing her features in golden warmth. I watched her shoulders relax, the faint tension in her brow ease, and realized she wasn't performing strength anymore. She was simply herself, and that was more beautiful than anything else she could have offered. She leaned slightly, almost hesitantly, until her shoulder brushed mine. Then, as though reassured by my stillness, she let her head rest against me. The weight was delicate, yet it carried an intimacy I felt down to my core. Her hair brushed my jaw, soft against my skin, and the faint rhythm of her breathing steadied into something calm, something trusting. I lowered my hand to the couch beside hers, not touching, just close. Slowly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, her fingers shifted until they grazed mine. A quiet, silent intertwining. We didn't need to speak. Words might have shattered the fragile honesty of the moment. Instead, we sat there, sharing the kind of closeness that feels earned, not taken. I thought of the broken window, how she had confessed that its rattle made the house feel empty, how it had left her vulnerable in ways she rarely admitted. Now, with the glass solid in its frame and her warmth pressed against me, the house didn't feel empty at all. Neither did I, time stretched, soft and unhurried. It didn't matter that the tea had gone cold, or that the world outside carried on without us. What mattered was this: she had asked me to stay, and I had. And in that quiet, without grand declarations or promises, I understood something simple yet certain: sometimes the smallest repairs lead to the deepest bonds. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more slow-burn romance tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have stayed, too? And if you'd like to hear more stories of unexpected connections, turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one.